take a look at the internet weather for the past week. These are the top 10 most probed ports. First place is 445 TCP, that's SMB. We've been seeing that at least in the top 2 or 3 for the longest time. 23 TCP is in second place, which is Telnet. 8089, I think we are attributing to Splunk, but there's a lot of different web ports it could possibly be. 22 TCP is after that, that's SSH. 80 ICMP is ping. 3389 is remote desktop protocol. 81 TCP is another web port. 8545 is the Ethereum GF daemon. 8080 is another web port, and 5038 is actually the Asterisk AMI. It's like the administration interface for an Asterisk PBX, which is interesting. I want to show this view today, and mostly it's because we've been showing the top 10, but if you don't think too hard about it, you might think they're all sort of like equally distant from each other. And I just wanted to show the distance between the top 2 ports that are in the list, which are 23 and 445. And you can see that the scanning on port 23 and 445, which usually hold the first and second slots, is miles ahead of the rest of the top 10. So 445 is actually the is the dark green on the list, and 23 is the light green. And you see those are the top 2. You see they just changed places, right? So if you go back down, you look all the way to the right, you can see they are actually fairly close to each other at this point in time, whereas in the past, 23 was significantly higher. This is a 60-day view. That dark blue, I believe, is ICMP, and you see maybe every 7 days or so, a significant uptick in that. But I just thought this was an interesting way of looking at it, because typically we take one at a time, but putting them in context is just kind of neat. So taking a look at the most sources probing, now that is that's the most individual sources and not the measure of volume. 445 and 23 are at the top. 8080 TCP is falling behind that, and then regular plain old 80 TCP. 5555 is Android Debug Bridge. We talked about 80 ICMP being ping. 1433 is Microsoft SQL. 5431, I believe, is a UPnP port for Broadcom devices. We talked about 81, and then 53 is DNS. Same kind of graph. You can see the top 2 up there that are jumping significantly in terms of the sources probing. That yellow is 445, and that wobbles significantly every single day. And then 23 is fairly static. And I think the 445 is a bunch of Windows machines being turned on and off somewhere. And the 23 is probably Linux servers, which tend to stay on longer. So they don't have as much variation. That's a theory. And the rest you can see down towards the bottom is, again, leaps and bounds away from where those top 2 ports are, but still significant in their own right. I just wanted to give that view. So 445, you're pretty used to seeing this graph. It hasn't really gone too far in the last couple of days, but since it's at the top of the list, I figured we'd take a look at it again. 5038 is that Asterisk AMI. And you can see there's significant scanning there. There's not that many sources overall, but the scan flows are pretty consistent. And Asterisk is a PBX, private branch exchange. Basically, it's a software phone system that you can use to make either telephone calls within an office or out of that office. So people will try and scan for those to commit some amount of phone fraud. 3283 didn't make it into the top 10 or even the top 20, but it made it to one of our alerts. Just because it changed so significantly off its baseline that we took a look at it. So 3283 I found is related to Apple Remote Desktop, which seems like a reasonable thing to be scanning for, the same way you would scan for RDP on Windows boxes. If you can remotely get into a box like this, it would make sense to target it.
We haven't actually seen any activity for this, at least in the last 3 months. And then a couple of days ago, we saw sort of a really huge spike up in that activity.
So someone's looking at it. There's a bunch of different scattered sources, and looking at different points in time, I couldn't see any one country that really dominated, but there were maybe 6 or 7, a handful, that were from Argentina at one point in time, so I made a note of that. But the rest seemed to be fairly spread out. It was sort of a weird one to look at. So we'll keep an eye on it. It's definitely interesting traffic now. 53 UDP made it back into the top 10, so we came back to it. At some point, at the start of the month, it was definitely in the top 10. You can see that massive spike around the 6th, but then you can see a bump of maybe 1,000 or so sources actually made it back into the top 10. So interesting how changes in the data that look relatively small when you graph them out can actually be big enough to bump them in and out of the top 10. And that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.